Hey folks. So with all the shit going on in Virginia and all the madness and the threat of Boogaloo and everything else, um, there's been a lot of conversation over the National Guard and whether or not the governor is going to activate them against the people, and whether or not the National Guard, if activated, would even go after the people. I'd like to be an idealist and think that they won't. I pray they won't. I hope they won't. God. I'm hoping sanity takes reason, and then we can settle this in a judicious manner, and the Supreme Court or whoever steps in and says, no, you communist twat waffles, you can't do this. Now, what the Virginia gun law is basically going to do, and it's a chain of laws. It's not just one law. It's a chain of different additions to their constitution and their state rules that would basically make it to where you can either have a shotgun, maybe a lever action rifle, and some handguns, as long as they don't weigh too much and you don't have over a certain number of a certain size magazine. It would ban any large capacity magazines, any standard capacity magazines. Um, it would ban you from holding guns. In fact, the only way you could have a gun is if it was wrapped in a blanket and you were hiding in your closet and you were lying about having a cigarette break, is basically what the law comes down to. Anyway, so the National Guard. I think we have to look at history and past events to kind of gauge what might happen at this point. So the first event I want to bring to your attention happened in 1921 in Logan County, West Virginia. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version of this. There was a labor dispute between union miners and non-union miners. The union miners went on strike. The mining company brought in strikebreakers and county sheriffs to try to quell this little rebellion. Now, the miners weren't having it. They had grown into a sizable little force and were going to fight it. There were several little skirmishes. People died. President Harding said, you deal with this or I'm going to send the National Guard in. So, fast forward. This culminated into what was called the Battle of Blair Mountain. Now, the Union members had the high ground. They had the better position. There was more of them. But by this point, the National Guard had been deployed. And the National Guard commander brought in a contingent of National Guard and took command of the strikebreakers and the sheriff's deputies that were involved, as well as company men from the Union who also participated in the fight. Now, by the end of the conflict, around 120 miners had been killed, the Union miners had been killed, and 3 National Guardsmen and a sheriff's deputy were killed. The reason for the gross mismatch of numbers there is most of the Union miners were armed with old shotguns and muzzle loaders and pistols and things like that, while your National Guardsmen were armed with Springfield 1903 rifles. They had greater range, greater velocity, and they basically just wiped them out. They could have had a million men on that mountain, and it wouldn't have mattered. It was what they were fighting with. So that's the first thing I want to point out. When they tell you all you need is a shotgun to take care of your home, think about that. Think about that. Now, the second instance I want to point out to you is the Bonus Army. This happened in 1932. And again, I'll give you the Reader's Digest of it. Soldiers who served in World War I had been promised a bonus for their service if they remained a certain amount of time. They never got the bonus. Thousands of them marched on the Capitol. the president had sent General MacArthur with the National Guard to quell this little rebellion. At the end of it, these veterans who were only fighting for what they deserved, 1,000 of them were killed. And I apologize. It was 130 were killed and nearly 1,000 were injured. My apologies. And then a few National Guardsmen were injured. I think it was like 30. So we see the National Guard kind of has a history with us. The last instance I'll point out to you, last couple of instances I'll point out to you would be Kent State, where National Guardsmen shot students for protesting. And Waco, where National Guardsmen drove tanks through walls, attacking children and women. Any way you cut it, I think we have to look at the situation realistically. I don't believe these young men and women are evil or anything like that. I don't believe they have any malice toward the populace. But what I will say is they are trained to do a job, and we train them well to do that job. And unfortunately, that training involves a minute amount of brainwashing to some degree. Been there, done that. So I think we have to think about what that situation can develop into. And I think we need to try to address it with our congresspersons and make sure that we are avoiding that happening again. I'd like to hope we've gotten past that as a people. That maybe we can find a better way to resolve it. I'm hoping the situation in Virginia can be resolved judiciously. That's what I really hope. If it can't, though, then, well, we all pretty much understand what it's got to be. Y'all have any questions? Feel free to ask me in the comment section. I'm happy to answer them. As always, folks, be decent to each other, because we're all in this together. Merry Christmas. Hey, folks. Thanks for watching today. As always, you can join the conversation at Prep Logic on Facebook and MeWe, and catch our podcast weekly at Anchor FM. As always, folks, be decent.